definitely be recorded, yes. So
It's going on Facebook as well. My God.
yeah, you're going to be a social media star. So
all right, I'm not a social media person.
Might have to change that. So, ladies and gentlemen, whoever's watching, either live or recorded, we're doing a series of talks before Shavuot. Last couple of years, we've had Gerald in person at our dinners. He's always not just entertaining, but very informative as well. Sadly, we are all stuck at home at the moment, but thanks to technology, we can still hear his words of wisdom, of entertainment, always with a passion and enthusiasm for his topic. So I'm going to hand over to Gerald the next 15-20 minutes. Who's going to talk about the Jewish contribution to life in Britain. Over to you.
Right. Yes, anyway. I was born in 1934, and I lived in the East End of London in a block of flats called Langdale Mansions at the end of a street not known for its cuisine or designer shops, Hessel Street. But what was life like at that time? Some of you of a certain age might be so more conversant with the Jewish way of life that was prevalent in London during the early 1920s and 1930s. And the great migration after the Second World War to more salubrious districts such as Ilford, Stamford Hill, Golders Green, and into northwest London. The East End, where so many Jews were living in the 1920s and 30s, had a distinctive identity, a flavour, one might say. Friday smelt of cholent, which in its cholent pot, covered with a cloth to keep it moist, was ceremoniously marched by children or their parents or their mothers to the bakery to be left overnight in the baker's oven and collected the next day. This ritual negated the need to cook on the Sabbath, and for 8p and the proof of identity and your correct sourceman, as they used to scream out, "Mine's the blue," it was collected on Shabbat morning. In this way, the lady of a religious or even non-religious house was spared the need to cook on the Sabbath. Delicious food was produced cheaply for the family. Shabbat meal and Yiddishkeit was properly observed. Whilst on the subject of food, fish and chips is often considered to be the iconic British meal. But as far back as 1860, a Jew called Joseph Malin introduced a combination of chips eaten with fried fish, so that most brilliant of all British dishes was the brainchild of a Jew. There were more numerous schools which sprang up in the East End, particularly in the 19th century, during the pogroms in Eastern Europe, named after the town or country where the congregation had come from. They could be dotted in back streets and most corner streets, and even in rooms in overcrowded houses, just big enough for a minion. Friendly societies helped to support the community's poor in many ways. The soup kitchen in Broome Street, supplying matzahs for Pesach and food throughout the year. Self-regulated autonomous loan clubs, where you had to save before you could borrow and where you would be rigorously questioned as to why you needed to borrow your own money. One talks of the Jewish East End, although a smattering of Jews had spread further out to Canning Town, Barking and Dagenham. When I speak of the Jewish East End, and as many writers such as Dr. Jerry Black and Israel Sang will perceive it to be, we look at an area encapsulated around Aldgate, Whitechapel and Mile End, where men earned their living in sweatshops owned by other Jews, where the men spent such free time as they had in the social clubs, and the women shopped for kosher and Jewish specialities in markets such as Watney Street, Wentworth Street, Petticoat Lane, Brick Lane, Commercial Road, Hessel Street, and Fashion Street, to name but a few. Money was short. Work was hard to come by. There were no benefits in those days, but men were industrious and found ways to seek employment in the tailoring trade, one of the largest in the community. And the men would meet on Whitechapel Waste on the pavement in a week to source vacancies, to offer their skills, and by dint of hard work, to improve their family situations. The Jews of London in those days could not expect much outside help, but the community had looked after its own since its early arrival, and Jewish hospitals and Jewish schools were founded, many of which provided the foundation for educational institutions, still providing excellent education for our children today. Despite the hardship, the 30s was a hive of activity, with a Yiddish theatre and entertainment at the Pavilion Theatre in Whitechapel and the Grand Palais. My father told me of a Turkish and steam bars called Shefsiks in Brick Lane, where on a Friday morning before Shabbat in the morning, men would take chicken and wine with them, and when relaxing after a good steaming, would eat and join in the humming and singing of Yiddish songs. Should you have read Dr. Jerry's black book on Jewish London, an illustrated history, you would recognize your parents and yourselves as children on many of the pages as he captures succinctly the atmosphere of the time. Well, of course, none of you, this is not new to anybody really, if you came from the East End of London. Much more interesting is why we came to be here, when and how we arrived. How far back in history did the Jews have such an impact on English society? I spent 4 years at Birkbeck College, University of London, 2008 to 2012, studying history for a BA, mostly medieval British history, which was my main subject. I did, however, during those years, expand my research into medieval Europe, North American history, 16th century to the present time, and the age of science, late 1700s to the 1939. I thought that it would broaden my knowledge, not only of British, but of the place occupied by Jews in medieval Europe and North America. It was during my time at Birkbeck and the diversity of modules that I studied that I observed that Jews were often, sometimes willingly, sometimes not, involved in politics as well as in trade, medicine and arts, and obviously religion throughout the medieval world, and their influence was felt in all societies and religions of Europe. What I also noticed was that religion was used to control society. Christianity used fear and retribution, torture, burning, and excommunication to bring deviators from the church back to the correct ecclesiastical doctrine and the religion of peace and goodwill, a contradiction in terms. However, Christianity was itself divided into many different interpretations of the belief, including Catholic, Protestant, Puritan, Presbyterian, Calvinism, to mention just a few. Theologians had their work cut out to find a perfect balance between the many variations of religion. In Oxford, in the early medieval period, learned Jews taught theology to Christians, and rabbis would be consulted on biblical texts. But the church, failing to understand that Jews were not interested in proselytizing, feared that they were trying to indoctrinate Christians to convert to Judaism. To the Christians, this was not only abhorrent, but also served to justify ostracizing all Jewish teachings and entering into a campaign of Jew hating. But we're going to go back further. In 55 and 54 BCE, Julius Caesar invaded England, and less than 100 years later, the Romans under Claudius began to settle in the land. It is feasible to assume that there were Jews in and amongst the Roman legions. In fact, there were Jewish legions just for Jews, and of whom there were no doubt recruited during the Roman campaign in the Middle East and beyond as mercenaries. There is no written record of any early Jewish settlements, but there is an assumption that there were Jews here mixed up with various people of other nationalities and religions who were absorbed into the Roman legions. The Romans left England in the year 410 AD and returned to Rome, where a civil war was taking place. However, from 80 AD until 1066, when William the Conqueror came on the scene, there were Jews living in the country, descendants of those who had stayed behind when the Romans left, but not in any organized communities. The history of the Jews in London as a community really started from the time when William the Conqueror arrived in England in 1066. He encouraged Jewish merchants and artisans from northern France to move to England. It was a time when there was a wave of anti-Semitism in Germany, Spain, Italy, and France. Nothing has changed there. The Jews had left those countries seeking an opportunity to achieve prosperity and safety, and it was in England that they found a safe haven and a degree of tolerance for their religious practices. It must be understood that the city of London was surrounded by a Roman wall built on the instructions of Emperor Hadrian in the year 200. Well, within this wall in the Middle Ages were kept the government, guilds, the church, fraternities, and apprentices, all under the strict religious control. On the fringe of the city and within the walls of the community, the Jews had settled, commemorating the still existing name of Old Jewry. Outside the wall were the stinks, where the leather tanners, soap and candle makers, tenters who used urine on the cloth as it was being dyed, hence the name tenter ground. There were cattle, foreigners and aliens. Foreigners were workers from the country, not citizens of the freemen of the City of London, but journeymen, unqualified in crafts, according to the established guilds. Aliens were workers from abroad, France, Holland and Spain, and also not permitted to operate their craft within the city walls. In England, Jews were not allowed to buy land, become lawyers, hold any governmental or military office. Neither could they become apprentices or join in any of the trade guilds, which were associated with churches and Christian fraternities. The function of Jews, therefore, became that of moneylenders and peddlers of old clothes. And here I must digress for a moment, because there is a connection with many of you seated here today. As peddlers of old clothes, Jews became competent at cobbling old clothes together and selling them on, thereby starting a second-hand clothing business, hence the name Petticoat Lane. In 1851, the year of the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens, one such cobbler from humble beginnings, Moses Moss, opened the first two shops in Covent Garden, selling second-hand clothes. Today we know his business as Moss Bros, with shops all over the country. Some of you might have rented suits from him when you were going to your functions many years ago. To continue, Christians were not, according to Christianity, permitted to be involved with usury, that is, lending money on interest. But in the 13th century, in the time of King Edward I, cathedrals and palaces were being built with finance from Jews, such as Westminster Abbey, Lincoln Cathedral, and Windsor Castle. They were amongst the money given by the Jews. Whenever the king needed to raise money for this purpose, he made a levy on the Jews. But the Jews were, needless to say, you must forgive me for a moment, but Jews were being penalized for doing as they were asked, and what others were not allowed to do. In order to relieve himself and the church of their liability to the Jews, and in the most perfidious act of treachery, Edward expelled the Jews from the country. When I was studying to become a tourist guide, a blue badge guide, I attended a lecture given in the then Dean, by the Dean of Westminster, Dean Edward Carpenter, in the Jerusalem Chapel. There were about 100 students attending this particular lecture. When it came to question time, I posed a question which was, to some, might have seemed controversial. The Dean was enraptured with the beauty of the Abbey and with its architects, but he failed to say where the money had come from to build it. I stood up and asked, how was it financed and by whom? He replied quickly, the moneylenders. I then asked if some of those money financiers had been Jewish moneylenders. I said some, as the king had also subscribed to the Abbey. The Dean spluttered a garbled yes. I then went on to suggest that as the Jews had been expelled from England by Edward I, and all money owed to the Jews, moneylenders from the barons, churches, and particularly Westminster Abbey, and the monarchy had been wiped off the slate, all the money that was owed to the Jews was confiscated. Should not the church now make some recompense to the Jewish community? Needless to say, there were sniggers, a bit of luck coughing, and another question was taken. The twist, when it came, was poetic justice. For as the Jews left England, the Lombards from Italy were invited to replace them as moneylenders. They charged higher rates of interest than had been the Jews. But Edward had reluctantly to accept his fate and pay up, as he was then by dealing with the Medicis, the most powerful Christian trading family in Europe, financiers to the Vatican and the Pope. In 1995, during archaeological excavations in the High Street in Guildford, a chamber was discovered with steps leading down to a room with carvings and scorch marks on the pillar, suggesting that it had been the site of a synagogue where the eternal light used to burn by the ark. Should you visit the accessorized shop in Guildford, you will see a plaque outside the shop indicating that this was the site of the synagogue. It is said to be the oldest synagogue in Britain, dating back to 1180, and one of the oldest in Western Europe. Alas, it has been concreted over, and all that remains is a stone from the ancient synagogue, which has been presented to the modern shul in Guildford. There is evidence of Jews in England in Tudor times, during the reign of Henry VII, Henry VIII, and Edward VI. Henry VIII discussed biblical texts with Jewish scholars in an attempt to justify his divorce from Catherine of Aragon and his marriage to Anne Boleyn. Small numbers were here in the time of Elizabeth I, Spanish and Portuguese conversos, that is, Jewish converts to Christianity, crypto-Jews who attended church services but worshipped secretly as Jews in London and Bristol. In 1588, during the reign of Elizabeth I, the converso Dr. Hector Nunish was lauded as a hero for being the first to warn of the sailing of the Spanish Armada. But her doctor, also a converso, Dr. Rodrigo Lopez, was accused of trying to murder Elizabeth. Evidence of this purported act of treason was brought to her attention by the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux, a one-time admirer of Elizabeth and jealous. He was envious of the diplomatic work of Lopez, the languages he spoke, as well as his role as an ambassador. Reluctantly, because she was always believed him to be innocent, she signed the death warrant for Lopez, who was brutally put to death. The major change in the relationship of Jews and the English came about during the interregnum, that is, the years of the Commonwealth, when Oliver Cromwell became Protector of England, Ireland, and Wales. The Scots at this time were confused as to what form of religion they would accept, Catholicism, Presbyterianism, or Calvinism. Oliver Cromwell, although maligned by many as the killer of King Charles I, was praised by the Jews for allowing them to return to England after an absence of 350 years. Not all Jews had left at the time of the expulsion. A number pretended to observe the rites and ceremonies of either Protestant, Christians, or Catholic by attending regular church services, but secretly practicing as Jews at home. The expression "to come out" could apply most aptly when these secret Jews finally came out about their religion. Charles II protected Jewish traders from the jealousy of the city merchants, fearful of competition. On their marriage, his queen, Catherine of Braganza, brought with her from Portugal her Jewish doctor, Dr. Fernando Mendes. There was also in her entourage the Jewish family of bankers, the brothers Duarte and Francisca da Silva, of whom she entrusted the management of her dowry. Turn one page over. Jews are known as the people of the book and with a thirst for learning. Jews are taught to read from the Torah from an early age, and in 1664, the Gates of Hope, a boys' school for poor Jewish children, was founded and supported out of synagogue funds. In 1669, only 124 men in the city of London were licensed to practice as brokers on the Royal Exchange. One was the Jew Benjamin Levy, who also was one of the original subscribers to the Bank of England. In 1701, Bevis Mark Synagogue was consecrated. The builder was a Quaker who refused to take any profit from the building as it was a house of God. Queen Anne herself supplied the wood for the roof, and Benjamin Disraeli's birth is recorded there. Benjamin Disraeli, his father, was a modernist of the time, associated with the literati such as Rex Whistler and Oscar Wilde. The death of Disraeli's grandfather meant that his own father would automatically become a warden of the shul. This caused problems, as his father was not a shul-goer and was fined £40 for refusing the office. That confrontation led to the family to convert to Christianity, and Benjamin was baptized with his family just before he would have been bar mitzvah. But Benjamin was a champion of Jewish emancipation who never turned his back on Judaism, and he subscribed to the shul and had his name read out every year on the Day of Atonement as a benefactor. About his Jewish ancestry, he famously replied, "Yes, I am a Jew. And when the ancestors of the right honorable gentleman were brutal savages in an island with no name, mine were priests in the temple of Solomon." Jewish patriotism has been displayed throughout their history in this country. Jewish men volunteered to fight in the armies of George II against the rebellious Scots, when in 1745, Bonnie Prince Charlie was invading, was himself now in a state of collapse. It was then that a Jew, Samson Gideon, descendant of a Lisbon family, stepped in to save the country. He managed to raise a loan in which, in today's money, would be £1.7 million. He invested his own money and pledged his own name and reputation to save the country from financial disaster. He never once denied that he was born a Jew. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschild family came to the aid of the British government by raising funds for the army. Throughout history of this country, and in particular London, where the seat of government is, Jews have showed their loyalty to a country that has given them salvation and the ability to this country. And the monarchy is demonstrated every Shabbat in the high holidays when prayers are said in synagogue for the safety and health of the royal family, something which Prince Charles had publicly acknowledged. Some of the luminaries who are worth mentioning and who lived in London included Daniel Mendoza, British boxing champion in 1784. He fought under the name of Mendoza the Jew, changing the perception that Jews were weak, passive, and unable to fight. Mendoza taught Lord Byron to box at his boxing establishment and was a favourite of King George IV. David Solomons, 1797 to 1873, became the first Jewish Lord Mayor. His first action as the Lord Mayor was to take off the inscription at the bottom of the monument to the Great Fire of London, which blamed Catholics for the Fire of London. He had that taken away completely. In 1845, all city offices were thrown open to Jews, and to date there have been 7 Jewish Lord Mayors of London. In 1858, after much opposition, Baron Lionel de Rothschild became the first Jewish member admitted to Parliament. In 1880, Jews fled Russia, the Russian and Polish pogroms. They were allowed into this country, but given no state benefits. The immigrants were helped by their own welfare schemes and by wealthy Jewish philanthropists. The building of the Royal London Hospital. Jews were anxious to take part in the place in society and in sports and social activities of the day. Brady Boys Club was founded in 1896 by Lady Charlotte Rothschild in a disused vicarage in Whitechapel. The Oxford and St George's Club was founded and opened in March 1914 by Basil Henricus. The generosity of Bernard Barron inspired the move from Cannon Street to Bernard Street, now named Henricus Street. The club members of Oxford St George's had their own cry. But if you want to join me in saying this, and if you were a past member of the Oxford St George's Club, it's a Maori chant. And if you're a member, this is what the chant would be. Boomalaka, boomalaka, wah, wah, wah. Miriam Moses, a social reformer and the first Jewish woman mayor of Stepney, was the founder of the settlement of Brady Girls Club. She died in 1965. Jewish loyalty to this country can be traced back to the reign of George II, when Jews volunteered to fight in the English army against the rebellious Scots. In the First World War, Zev Jabotinsky and Joseph Trumpeter persuaded the British government to accept volunteers to form the battalions, Jewish battalions, especially for Jews. The Jewish Legion, as it became known, was made up of 50,000 Jewish volunteers in the British Army, in the battalions, the 38th to the 42nd Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers. They came from Britain, America, Australia, New Zealand, Palestine, Egypt, the Ottoman Empire. They fought bravely in Gallipoli, Egypt, and Palestine, and never in the history of this country have so many of one race offered their lives and loyalty to king and country. So said Winston Churchill, recorded in the Hansard in 1944. But however great their contribution, the Jews would never be universally popular or welcome. There was opposition in the press to the Jews from Nazi Germany being given refuge in Britain. In 1938, the Daily Mail wrote, "Once it was known that the floodgate would be opened, we would be inundated by thousands seeking refuge." Jewish EastEnders went to Chingford by Charabanc, that is a coach, to burn effigies of Chamberlain after his return on the 30th of September 1938 from Munich, excuse me, with the infamous piece of paper announcing peace in our time. The field where they gathered was scarred with ditches and to prevent aircraft landing. I remember that because as a child, I was taken there with my mother and father. Although Chamberlain thought that he had negotiated a peace treaty, the Ministry of Defense hedged their bets and prepared for war, and war broke out on the 3rd of September 1939. Jews have proved themselves benevolent and willing to help others, not just themselves. Whenever needed, they have been patriotic, brave, innovative, and successful. A plaque on the bridge in Stepney reads, "Magnus ad maiora," from great things to greater. They must have had Jews in their mind. Thank you.
Gerald, thank you very much, as ever. Oh, got a funny background, 1 second. Always fascinating information. Thank you for joining us. We will make this available on YouTube shortly for those that missed it. And we miss your talks in Shaw. Hopefully we will be back soon.
I hope so too. Look after yourself and your family.
Regards to Cal and the family. And
I'll do just that. God bless.